so they fought a revolution, the American Revolution. How we the people here decree, we've the right to life and liberty.
And you're currently watching the Just Kidding Around show. Hi, my name's Diane Miller. You're watching the Just Kidding Around show. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Each week, we invite community members into our studio to share their hobbies, crafts, and talents with the entire community. So we want to thank our viewers for joining us, and we're very excited to have a new craft or hobby on our show this time. But before we get started, we're going to look on our camera and give a shout out. This is Bruce, by the way. He's our talent this week. And both of us are going to look in the camera and give a shout out to somebody in the audience we'd like to say hi to.
I'd like to say hi to my oldest grandson, Colton, he's in Boy Scouts.
Oh, how old is he?
15.
Ooh, okay.
But he's got his radio merit badge.
All right. And we'll find out why that's important in just a few minutes. I want to say hi to John Amos, who is John's worked on this show for many, many, many years. He's one of our regular cameramen, and he shares the same hobby you do.
He does.
Yeah, and with that, let's get started. And the hobby we're talking about is ham radio. And I have to be honest, I know nothing about it. So can we start by, Bruce, can you tell me just why is it called ham? What do those letters stand for?
The story that I've heard, and think back to the Morse code we heard in the opening, and when people send Morse and they aren't very smooth, back in the old days they were said to be ham-fisted, like you got this big chunk of meat.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Nope, I'm not kidding you. That's the story I've heard.
It's that simple. I thought it was an acronym or something.
Nope.
Oh, that's interesting. What an interesting story.
But
okay.
we're also known as, and perhaps more correctly, as amateur radio.
Yeah, I was thinking the letters had something to do with amateur, but I couldn't figure out why that H was in there for amateur. I don't know. And how long has this been around?
Just over 100 years.
100 years. So it's older than television.
By quite a bit.
Older than radio?
Probably older than commercial radio, because the ability to communicate by Morse code wirelessly occurred before the ability to communicate by voice.
Oh my goodness.
Wirelessly.
Okay, so this has actually evolved more with Morse code.
Initially, yes.
Interesting. All right. So probably I'm thinking, since I didn't know a lot about ham radio, maybe a lot of our viewers don't either. And you were gracious enough. I met you at St. Martin's. There's a group of people, right?
Yes.
And about how many people are in this group?
We have roughly 80 members, but I belong to 3 different groups in Thurston County.
Okay, so. And John Amos is in one of these groups too?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so there's groups. So if people want to learn more, they can go to one of these groups, right?
That's the best way to do it.
All right. And one of the things I want to ask, I remember you said on Sunday when I met you, you said that you had, I think it was something like 22 people following the marathon?
Roughly 20 people involved as communicators.
And what do
for
they do?
The Capital City Marathon.
All right.
Mostly we monitor and keep track of people. And if there's a participant that's looking distressed, look like they need help, or maybe they made it to an aid station, but they need a ride back to the start where their vehicles are or their family are to pick them up, we'll give them whatever help they need.
Okay.
If it's a true medical emergency, out come our phones and we punch in 911.
So is that sort of the basis for ham radio, emergency assistance, or do people just call each other up and chat a bit?
Well, we all call each other up and chat. We call it a rag chew,
Okay.
to tell you the honest truth. And if I could, I'd like to read the first sentence of the law that permits this marvelous hobby to exist.
Okay.
Okay, so this is from the Federal Communications Commission, otherwise known as the FCC. The section of the law governing amateur radio is 97, and 97.1 subparagraph A states, recognition and enhancement of the value of the amateur service to the public as a voluntary, non-commercial communication service, particularly with respect to providing emergency communications. So without the recognizing, virtually every government in the world recognizes the importance of amateur radio for emergency communications.
So that is your basic purpose of it in existence.
If everything else goes down, we hams can get a message out.
Wow. So that means the mountain blows up, our cell phones are dying,
Yes.
the televisions aren't working, and we're going to be relying possibly on you guys.
That's a very strong possibility.
So you said before, as we were waiting for the cameras to roll, you said that these are legal around the world except for one place. Where is that place?
North Korea.
Unbelievable. So even in communist China, they have ham operators.
I've talked to them.
Unbelievable. So how do you go about searching for people around the world that are doing this hobby?
Well, basically you tune up on what we call a band, which is, we refer to them by wavelength. So for example, 20 meters. So if you picture roughly 20 yards on a football field, and a wave from crest to crest, that's what our radio wave would look like. Okay, going out on the air off of our antenna, and if everything works right, it will travel around the world,
So
one direction or the other.
Each wave dead ends at a certain point.
No, it goes continuously. It will lose power or effectiveness with distance, particularly here on Earth because we've got an atmosphere and everything else. Radio waves in outer space, well, first of all, they're a great source of information for professional astronomers and amateur astronomers too, some of which are ham radio licensed. But we now have some spacecraft from Earth that have gone out of our known solar system, out past Pluto, and we're still communicating with them.
Oh my gosh.
Very low power, and it can take several weeks for a transmission to reach the spacecraft, and then for the return from the spacecraft to Earth.
So there's a lot of value in this, other than just emergency.
It's huge. And
yeah. So even though you said it's over 100 years old,
It is.
And is it more advanced now than it used to be, or is it basically that same technology?
No, technology is completely different. And while I didn't bring it tonight, my home radio, one of my home radios is called software-defined radio, and you still have to buy a black box.
Oh.
And it's got an on button. And that's about it.
Oh.
Okay, so where this radio has buttons and knobs, my one at home, I work entirely off the computer. Most of the signal processing is done by software on the computer.
Okay. Are you all self-taught? How do you learn this? Or does the club, if I join your club, would you help teach me, or am I expected to self-teach?
Well, I'm a retired teacher, and almost a lot of learning is self-taught. Let's just cut to the chase, okay? So you've got to put in the effort. But
are there books, though, or there must
yes.
be YouTube videos on how
Yes.
to do ham radio?
Yes,
Okay.
yes to all of that.
Okay, so it's self-taught,
and
but
there's-
there's tools out there
And there's
to help
online
you. Okay.
classes. When we get a group of people together, for example, we've had a request for a general class. We would like to see 6 to 8 or 10 people to take that. We would organize
Oh, you would?
a class for
If I knew
that
a
class
Girl-
of license.
Okay, if I
Yes.
had a Girl Scout troop, I could bring them in and they could earn a
Absolutely.
badge?
In December, we took a group of Sea Cadets through.
A group of what?
Sea Cadets.
Secret. Okay,
Yes.
great. Okay, so this is a great hobby for people at home. If your kid's sitting around saying there's nothing to do, this sounds like. Do people of all ages? Is it dying off as far as interest, as far as a hobby, or is this something more and more people are doing?
It's got its ups and downs. I think the youngest licensed ham worldwide is 4 years old.
Oh, goodness.
But you have to know that there was a lot of coaching.
Yeah.
And we're permitted to accommodate. We've given tests to blind hams where somebody reads the question. They're all multiple choice, so you read the 4 choices and they choose and you can answer it for them.
Multiple choice.
Yes.
So that's interesting. You bring up a license. So I can't just use this without a license. It's not like a cell phone.
Well, let's put it this way. You can listen to anything without a license. The easiest way to do that is actually there's websites where you can, over the internet, listen to amateur radio.
Oh, that would be a good way to start then.
Shortwave listening is the way many of us have started.
Okay, so you just listen to what people are talking
Now,
about.
to
Okay.
transmit, you need a license.
Okay, so to talk, I need a license. And where would a person buy the hardware? Where would that come from?
Well, both these came off of internet sources.
Oh, okay, internet
Okay,
sources.
yes.
All right.
And so, and there are electronic stores that carry this, but this was my first radio, if I'm doing this correctly. And
Hold it still. Charles' camera's on now.
okay, but it's made in China. They're available now for about $30, which is
So they're not really expensive.
and for local communications, there can be some failings, but this particular radio is enormously popular for local communications. With this radio from my house, I can get around Thurston County very well.
All right.
Okay?
So if say you mentioned frequencies earlier.
Yes.
So say I had a ham radio and I wanted to call you. Do I have to have your frequency to call you? Does this thing ring?
No.
Well, how do I know?
We would have to both have our radios on and tuned to the same frequency, yes.
Well, how would that happen though? I mean, do I call you on the phone and say turn to this frequency?
Or send me an email.
Yeah, send me an email.
Hope I read it in time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have schedules. We have, when you have a two-way radio, you do not always have to have a physical meeting to have a meeting.
Okay.
So Tuesday night is what we call net night, put net in quotes because that's an on-air meeting. And I participate in 2 nets. One is Thurston County ARES. ARES is an acronym for Amateur Radio Emergency Services. And we can talk more about that in a couple of minutes. And then the second net, we call it the ORS net. ORS is an acronym for Olympia Amateur Radio Society, which is more of a informational. We're doing enough events, public service events. We need to spend time organizing those.
Oh, okay. So that's what a lot of the.
And then if somebody's got a technical problem or an issue or needs help, that's the best way to get a hold of us, or email me. You had my email up earlier.
Did we get your? Oh,
there it is, right there.
Boy, those guys are good. Wow, they're good.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else you want to say that we haven't talked about? Maybe the history.
The history we delved into a little bit with
The Morse code.
the Morse code,
Right.
and
that it's older
the
than
beginning-
commercial radio.
the beginning of the radio, and that was like first generation radio. Second generation radio, you might remember, were the tube sets.
Okay.
Okay, third generation were transistor radios,
Okay.
and the newest is software-defined radio, where the computer is the radio.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That
But I guess that makes sense.
okay, so we've
Yeah.
we've
Just
gone
didn't
that
think
far.
about it.
We're
Yeah.
essentially fourth generation. Some other things, practical uses of radio for a hobby and service. We have people testing that want to extend the control range of drones or robots.
Oh, yes. I
Yes.
could see these combined with
Okay, so you can go
drone.
out controlling a drone or a robot,
Yeah.
maybe out to a couple of miles,
Ooh.
where as opposed to maybe 50 yards with just the off-the-shelf controller.
Oh. Is that in the experimental stage, or you actually
No,
do that now?
it's available now.
Okay.
Education in STEM. STEM stands for science, technology, education, and math. The radio hobby is all four of those, and so it just fits like a glove.
Are there public schools teaching children?
It depends on the teacher. It takes a teacher, usually a licensed ham, or a contact with a club.
Okay, we have a STEM teacher in our school. I could.
Yeah,
You would
to 'em.
come and talk to our.
Absolutely. We can
Okay.
set up a radio station, and even though for this year, just today, the window ended in September, the window will open again, and there's a multi-year process. But hams are putting school children in contact with astronauts on the International Space Station.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I'm writing that down. I'm going to have a ham radio club after school. I already have clubs. I'm going to have a ham club, and we're talking to astronauts, right?
Yes.
You know what? I thought you were going to say that they were speaking to children in China and other countries.
We can do that too.
Oh, we're going to do that at South Bay.
Okay.
Okay, let me get that down. Wait till my principal finds out.
Another aspect, and again, I'm going through a list of more practical ones, a scientific study. And I participated in what was called the Solar Eclipse QSO Party. So last August, we had a solar eclipse, and my brother-in-law, fortunately enough, lives in Prineville, Oregon, which was the epicenter of totality. And I set up an antenna in his garden, and I worked what's called a digital mode that gets picked up, listened to by remote stations. And if they hear the signal, it feeds that information into an internet site, and the scientists get that data. And in fact, I just read today that the first paper, because this was a very broad study in amateur radio's participation. It was just a very narrow slice, but that slice involving some of the data from amateur radio was published today, or just I read about it today.
Yeah.
Okay, big name universities.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is all, I think it's obvious, but this isn't a visual process at all. None of it's visual.
Not necessarily.
Oh.
So my software-defined radio
Yeah.
is almost 100% visual, because I get a screen and I can see the signals, and I just take my mouse and put the cursor on the signal and click.
But what I meant by that was the process. It's pretty much audio. I mean, or you're going to different. You're not seeing images of people or things.
Yeah, and I mentioned digital modes. Digital modes are keyboard to software. The software creates what I call DDLs. It's just noise. But the noise goes out over the radio, and somebody with a reverse setup, the computer, the software, and whatever radio they're receiving, will see letters appear on their screen.
Oh, so that's how it's visual. So it kind of can turn into a texting type of thing.
Texting, and we even have email over radio.
Okay, so you know what? You're not going to believe this, Bruce. We really don't have that much more time.
Yeah.
But is it possible that you can pick this up right now and contact somebody for us? Can you show us?
With a little bit more work, but I'm not sure you want to take the time. But right now.
We have 8 minutes.
We have 8 minutes left.
What can you do in 8
But
minutes?
I could, and I did bring an antenna. I did bring a power supply. Most modern radios run off of, you would think of it as 12 volts, the same as an automobile battery. Okay? And I brought a power supply that converts the 120 volt wall socket.
So we need power. We need to talk about that.
It requires electricity.
Always?
Yeah, it pretty much doesn't work without electricity.
Because I live in Tumwater, and many years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, we lost power. Do you remember that snowstorm? And many of us went like 5
Yes.
days without power.
Yep.
And I had a landline. That was the only thing I had that worked. Everybody with cell phones, they were all dead. And, a lot of people were relying on cell phones at
I don't
that
have a
time.
landline anymore, and I didn't during the snowstorm.
Okay. So would this be useless if we didn't have electricity?
Well, there's ways to make electricity. Number one, generators.
That would be true for cell phones too.
Not if the towers are down. And
Oh,
actually,
true. Cell phones need their towers. You
and
don't
they-
need towers for this.
no,
You need an antenna, though.
you have to have an antenna.
Where's this antenna? On your roof? On your
It
car?
could be one of our members has what we call a magnetic mount antenna, and he sticks it on a cookie sheet and kind of sets it on a bookcase. That's it. Okay.
I bet you guys were
It's
fun
that
in high
simple.
school.
Oh, yeah. We have a blast even today.
I'm sure you do. Yeah, it would be an interesting club to be a part of.
So most of us are set up with what we call mobile, with radios in our vehicles. And of course, there you have a battery with electricity as long as the gasoline lasts.
There you go.
In addition, and this is true for me personally, as well as many of us, we're putting battery storage associated with our radio. We've got solar panels. So we can, to the best of our ability, it's not going to be the same as if we had commercial power. But to the best of our ability, we're going to be able to work as long as the batteries
So
last.
if there were ever a bad earthquake or a true emergency, we would be relying on our ham operators probably a lot.
That's what happened in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria.
Oh, really?
And so the Red Cross contacted our national group, the American Radio Relay League, and they asked for 50 hams in 24 hours. Keep in mind, right up here, it says volunteer.
And they weren't paid.
They had 350 volunteers.
Oh, my goodness.
And keep in
And
mind,
they wanted 20?
there's no power, there's no sewer, there's no water. I mean, it's
And they made it work.
primitive. The suppliers put together 25 radio stations,
Oh, my goodness.
and then in 48 hours, they were feet on the ground in Puerto Rico.
So that's, oh, wow. And that was
That's
the main...
how it works. Now, the Red
Yeah.
Cross's plans immediately went out the door because none of the hospitals had communications. So 10 hams went to hospitals so that
Okay.
Hospital A could call Hospital B and say, hey, we've got a spare bed.
Oh.
And another number of hams went with power company personnel, emergency personnel, police and fire, that type of thing. And the Red Cross got what was left over. Now, what the hams were doing for the Red Cross is sending digital, just words, back to the U.S., and they were creating databases of who was in the various shelters. And then back in the U.S., they built this big Red Cross database. So if you had a friend or relative in Puerto Rico and you wanted to know their status,
they could look at that database.
you could just look at that database on the internet.
Wow. Can you imagine? You know, there should be more people trained in this because
it's-
we all think, oh, my cell phone can do this and my cell phone can do that. Not if the power's down.
Not if the power's down.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm always charging mine anyway. Every day I got to charge mine. Gosh. So how exciting. Now, how long have you actually personally been doing ham radio?
5.5 years is
That's
all.
all?
That's
oh,
all.
my gosh.
And we got members that are over 60, and you mentioned the snowstorm.
Yeah.
And I said we were without power and communications for 5 days, and I thought, there's something I can do about that.
Oh.
And so here I am.
So that's how you got started?
Yes,
The snowstorm?
the snowstorm. Well, and being 5 days without communications, and we did that fine. But
That was scary,
But
too.
what we were concerned about, and we had no way to get out a message, was our parents seeing on the news
Yeah.
that Olympia was shut down and that they'd be worried about us, even though
Yes.
we were doing fine.
Yeah. Wow. I assumed you'd been doing this since junior high or something.
I became interested back in Scouts. And
Okay.
then life happens, as it does with many dreams and goals.
Sure, yeah.
And here in retirement, it's happening.
Well, and your legacy is already living through your grandson. I think it's wonderful. He's become interested because of you, I'm
Oh,
assuming?
yeah. Yeah.
Does he live around here?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you grandson and grandpa can get on there and talk to each other?
We can get them and talk.
So if you're, I only have a minute, but I want to ask this. If you and I are talking, can other people listen to our conversation?
Yes.
Oh, so it's not as private then as a cell phone might be.
It's public airwaves.
Public airways.
And so if you and I didn't want eavesdropping,
Right.
we would have to come up with a system of, it's called encryption.
Okay. Okay. Well, I would be excited actually about just finding somebody in another country. How exciting that would be.
Well, and it's your radio station. You buy a radio, but you built this station.
Okay.
And when you make a contact in a new country, at least in my case, it's stand up from the chair and do a jig.
Yeah.
It's exciting, okay?
It's exciting. Okay. I bet. Like I found somebody. Or talking to an astronaut, like you said. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming. And this was kind of short notice, but wow, what an important thing to talk about.
It's
fun and important.
It's a very important hobby with a purpose. We do a lot of service, and we're backup communicators virtually worldwide
Okay.
for government and emergency people.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up. Charles is giving me that sign.
Okay.
I want to thank you, Bruce. And what's future contact would be that information that was...
Yeah, the email, my
Got
call
it.
sign.
Okay, so I hope
Yes.
you wrote that down. Thank you for joining us. Bye. Thanks to a wonderful crew. Bye.
Bye.
Finished it. 1 second left. And you don't want to go over.
Live happily in America. And built the new world colonies, but King George wouldn't set them free, so they fought a revolution, the American Revolution. How we the people here decree, we've the right to life and liberty. We're all created equally in America.
And you're currently